And Nick, I'll let you take it from here.
Sure. Hey, everybody. We're going live now. We're going to let some people filter in and we'll get started in a few minutes. Welcome to Maine's Climate Action Plan, breaking news and analysis. I see people are jumping in, so let's just hold tight. My clock says a minute before the hour. We'll give it a few minutes after the hour to let people finish their lunch or coffee or whatever stage of the day you're at, and then we'll get started here. For folks who are joining on, I love to hear where you're coming from. So I think people have access to the chat. And so hello from Cumberland. That's where I'm coming from, not the @ sign. Change that a little bit. Arlington, VA in the house. Welcome.
Hi,
Hartsville. Philip. Westbrook, there we go. Wiscasset, Sopo, Sedgwick, Tossum. Yeah, I love this part. North Yarmouth, Brunswick, Biddy, Auburn, Windham, a lot of exclamation points. Brooks, Maine, Portland, Harpswell, Camden, Brunswick, keep it coming. Denver, across the country, Farmington. It's not a party until someone from Farmington shows up. Camden, Mars Base, Apollo. Good, you get good service up there. Congratulations on getting in. Belfast, Vienna, Austria or Maine, Florida Keys, Orono, Bangor. I love it. Look at this, Hartford. Good representation. So I see 12:01. We'll give it 2 more minutes. I see a bunch of folks on, but we'll give it 2 more minutes. Albuquerque, where it's, I'm sure, warm. I'm sure it's warm. I don't know how it is for the rest of the Mainers, but it is sort of drizzly and raw and not ideal out there. Hope someone's enjoying a sunny day. Kenneth loves it. I bet you do. Raw for sure. Raw for sure. Welcome to almost November in Maine. Well, thanks again, everyone. We're just waiting another minute or 2 to get started, and we're going to jump into our event today. Thank you all for joining. For the folks who are on, this, of course, is the webinar format, which means we can't see you or hear you, but you can throw your chats in the chat. As we get started and as we have questions, I'll go through this a little bit in a minute, but as you have questions for any of the panelists, please put them in the Q&A box, which is along the bottom of your screen. Lisa had 6 inches of snow. That's too much snow for October.
We had our first snow in Bar Harbor here yesterday.
Did you? Did it stick?
Just a few flakes.
Yeah, we had a few flakes. You know, as a kid, snow before Halloween just doesn't feel right. Welcome. We got a great mix of people here from some great towns, so thanks you all for joining. Oh, and I can see, I guess, that the chats just come to us. So I guess not everyone has the opportunity to see the swarm of locations, but let me assure you, it's a swarm. And I thank you all for joining Topsfield, Mass. And it's 12:03, so I think we should get going. Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to Maine's Climate Action Plan, breaking news and analysis, an event to keep the public updated on the progress of the Maine's Climate Council as they work towards a groundbreaking and critical climate action plan. I am Nick Lund from Maine Audubon, and I am joined once again by some leaders from Maine's climate community. But before I introduce them, I want to express my excitement and gratitude on behalf of the organizations in our community about the state's progress confronting climate change. We want to thank Governor Janet Mills, and thanks to her, Maine is one of the trailblazers of climate change planning. And this year's Climate Action Plan will serve as a model for other states working to take action. We want to thank the governor and her staff at the Office of Policy Innovation and the Future, GOPIF, and all the members of the Maine Climate Council and its working groups for their hard work on this plan. This is critical stuff, right? This is in this stressful run up to some national elections, it's been such a welcome break to hear our state think so deeply about solving problems coming at us in the future. The groundwork being laid by the Climate Action Plan and the Climate Council due on November 1st, and the policies potentially implemented as a result will benefit Maine, not just in the sense of improving our environment and our futures, but also putting us back on track to be the center of innovation, positioning us to meet economic challenges that come at us as well. But we'll only see those benefits, of course, if we can produce a bold and equitable plan. And we're here today to discuss whether we think we're on track, right? So before I get too deep, I want to introduce the other members of my panel. So first of all, David Costello, Climate and Clean Energy Director at the Natural Resources Council of Maine, NRCM. David worked for the state of Maryland, overseeing the development and implementation of Maryland's Climate Action Plan between 2008 and 2015. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Nick.
Kathleen Neal, the Director of Policy and Partnerships of Maine Conservation Voters. Kathleen co-chaired the Buildings Working Group of the Climate Council and serves on the Council's steering committee. Hey, Kathleen.
Thanks, Nick.
And Anya Wright, the youth representative for the Maine Climate Council and a founding member of Maine Youth for Climate Justice. Hey, Anya.
Hi.
All right, welcome all. So now is the part where I do some technical updates. So like I said, we're in webinar mode, which means that only the host and the presenters can be heard. I'm going to do a quick sort of background overview right now, and then we'll jump into the meat of the presentation, which will be discussions and questions with our panelists. And then when we're finished with that, we're going to open it up to questions from you all, the listeners, for all the time we have left. Like I said, if you do have a question, please don't put it in the chat on the side. Please put it instead in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. This lets us keep track of the questions much easier and sort of sort through them. So please put them in the Q&A. This session is being recorded, thankfully, by Todd at NRCM. I'll make sure I give Todd a shout out for helping organize and run the show behind the scenes today. Thanks, Todd. And it'll be available as a video on a bunch of our websites that we'll be in touch with later. So that's the technical piece. I want to now jump into a poll question, which I think Todd can help me launch, which is, we want to know, did you attend? There were 2 Climate Council meetings in October, the 1st and the 21st. If you could see the poll, and if you could, we just want to get a sense of, did people attend these meetings? How well-versed are you with sort of where we are right now? I see these numbers ticking up, and it looks like the did not attend either meetings is leading currently. Good to know, good to know. So we're catching you up to speed. You know, we want to make sure we have this event as an opportunity for folks who weren't able to take the time to visit the other meetings. Totally fine. So we're glad we can provide that service. And I see that over 71% of folks weren't able to attend either meeting. So good to know. We'll make sure that we give you the info you need. And if that poll question is still on your screen, just click it off on the X at the top. All right, now I'm going to sort of jump into some background about what we're doing here. So bear with me while I share my screen. Here we go. Hopefully you can all see that. And okay, so everybody can see that, okay, right? We started this process in June of 2019 when the governor and the legislature created the Maine Climate Council, an assembly of scientists, industry leaders, and bipartisan local and state officials and engaged citizens. Here she is signing the bill there, and everyone's very excited, of course. The council was tasked with an ambitious goal. Council is tasked with an ambitious goal. So developing a 4-year plan to put Maine on a trajectory to reduce emissions by 45% by the year 2030 and 80% by 2050. A supplemental executive order from Governor Mills said that the state must also achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. And you can see here on this slide, you know, what this looks like for our progress and how we're trying to get down there. How was the council divided up? Well, it was divided initially into 6 working groups. About 250 total members from folks all over Maine, from industry leaders, nonprofit leaders, municipal leaders, government representatives, agency leaders, coming together to work on specific areas that we knew would play a big role in climate change future, and develop some recommendations that could be folded into the final climate action plan. Each of these groups spent months working to develop its strategies for both mitigation and adaptation that were presented to the full Maine Climate Council in June. You can see here that the working groups were the Buildings and Infrastructure and Housing Subcommittee, Coastal and Marine, Community Planning, Community Resilience Planning, Public Health and Emergency, Energy Working Group, Transportation Working Group, and Natural and Working Lands Working Group. They were all also advised by a scientific and technical subcommittee that helped with some of the background science of climate itself. Where are we now? So here's sort of a timeline going back from the council's first meeting in January through the red arrow, which is the end of October. The strategies from the working groups were presented in June, and they're being folded into the larger council who is developing a climate action plan. They held several meetings in September about sort of an outline framework of that plan. And we had an event similar to this in September to discuss how they were doing then. And then the council had 2 additional meetings this month, the most recent being on October 21st, to put to share sort of some of the more meat on the bones of the plan, and giving the indication of how the final climate action plan might be shaping up. And that's really what we're talking about today, how we're looking as we enter the stretch run to the final plan, which is due to the governor on December 1st. And just to give you a bit of a framework and understanding of how the council is sort of organizing its solutions here, they've split the thinking into adaptation and mitigation, right? So how to reduce emissions and how to adapt and prepare for the impacts that are coming. So I'm not going to read these in full, but they're thinking about how we can build healthy and resilient communities, how we can invest in climate-ready infrastructure, how we can protect Maine's environment and natural resource economies and promote natural climate solutions. Those are all part of the adaptation end of things. And then there's the mitigation, how we can reduce our emissions, right? And we can reduce them in the transportation sector by bringing the future of transportation to Maine. We can reduce them in the home energy efficiency sector by modernizing our buildings. And we can drive innovation in our industrial sectors to reduce emissions. So that's where the council is and how they are framing things going forward. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And we are going to turn it over to our panelists. Let me get my questions out here and start talking about where we think we are, right? I'm just going to kick it off. We're going to start with sort of an open question to our panelists about a general assessment of where we are now. Again, we are here at the end of October. The council has a meeting coming up on November 12th, where they may be hopefully sort of voting and considering a draft plan and voting on whether it can be adapted as our final plan to present to the governor. So we're really in the home stretch here. We know quite a bit more than we did previously about what is in this plan or maybe in this plan. So I want to talk now to our experts on the panel to see how we feel about that, right? So I'm going to turn it over first to David Costello to talk about, David, what's your general assessment? What's added or added to the plan since we last talked? What's still missing from the plan? And take it away.
Hey, thanks, Nick. First, I'd like to say good afternoon to everybody joining. And also, like Nick, I'd like to start by commending the governor, Governor Mills, and the legislature for the important legislation that was passed and enacted in Maine in 2019. I'd also like to commend the hard work of the council, the Climate Council, and the working groups. Over 250 people, Mainers, have participated in developing well over 660 pages of ideas and information related to, ideas and programs to address the causes and consequences of climate change. And of course, what we're talking about now is the more recent additions to the framework. We're waiting on the plan. The first draft we expect to see the end of next week, which will be great. But as the plan has developed, these frameworks have developed over the past month. Notable additions include the fact that they're talking a lot more about the importance and the fact that climate action will drive a lot of job creation and economic revitalization. So that's very important. Also, they've added some language, a number of actions that we think are important. We'll discuss further as we get into the discussion today. But one item that they've added as well is to look to engage more of the public and to educate the public more about the impacts and opportunities that climate change presents. One thing that's particularly interesting to me is the addition of a section in the framework, and I suspect in the plan, that'll focus on policy implementation. As you know, these action plans are all about what gets implemented, what'll drive progress. And this section in particular highlights the importance of identifying concrete actions, concrete goals and actions. The fact that funding will be required, significant funding in large part, or investments in large part will be required to achieve these goals, and the need for performance metrics and accountability to drive and measure progress. Now, Nick, as it relates to what I still think could be added, what might be missing is that the framework still does not, it lacks sufficient detail on the, the extent to which and when the planned actions, the listed actions, there are over 80 listed in the most recent framework, will be implemented. That's, of course, very critical. What I would suggest is that the council consider, adding more actionable and measurable language. And what I mean by that, for instance, that includes, if you look what's included now, if you get more specific language as it relates to the particular action and impacts related to that action in terms of both goals and annual benchmarks. So when I say goals, for instance, it'd be great to see what we expect to achieve by 2030, as well as 2025. Right now it references 2025, it somewhat references 2030. Given where the science is and where scientists globally have said we've really got to act fast. We've got to address climate change by 2030 to really avoid the worst impacts of climate change globally. The other thing is one element they could add is annual benchmarks, annual action and goal benchmarks. I think that would help us better understand the means in which we are attempting to make progress as well as to measure progress. And of course, it's important to list the amount of funding, investment that'll likely be required. And doing that, then we'd have a better understanding of what it's going to drive in terms of benefits as well, particularly as it relates to economic and job benefits. I think those kinds of things could be added in as well. And of course, you could also add information that relates to that isn't listed in the plan specifically yet, but would talk about greenhouse gas reductions attributable to a particular action, particularly these key, the most important actions, and as well as health benefits or health savings and energy savings. Those are things that the council might want to consider adding to the plan. The other thing I would stress that I think is missing, we don't have a sense of prioritization yet. I think it's awfully important. There are over 80 actions listed, but if you take a look at those actions, less than a dozen are probably going to generate or drive the vast majority, over 85% of the benefits as it relates to environmental, greenhouse gas reduction benefits, job benefits, equity, social equity, and health benefits. So I think it's important at some point to really stress the importance, if we're going to put a lot more detail in the plan, at least to focus on those actions that we understand and to articulate in the plan which actions are going to drive the most benefits. So why don't I stop there, Nick? I think that covers at least an overview.
Before we move on, can you add some more detail about sort of which of those maybe should be prioritized or?
Well, sure. I can start with, on the transportation, as it relates to the transportation sector. And I know Kathleen is going to pick up on the building sector, but on transportation, transportation right now, 54% of Maine's carbon emissions, and it's a sector that's been growing in terms of emissions, are transportation related. So we think it's important to support some innovative programs. And the most innovative currently is called the Transportation Climate Initiative, which is a regional cap and invest program, which would put a cap on emissions for the region and basically would charge, motor fuel suppliers an allowance, required that they have a permit to pollute in essence, and that would raise revenue. We expect that could raise over $150 million in revenue for Maine. And what that would do is fund these other priorities. And the other priorities, and many of these, or a number of these, are in the plan. A couple aren't listed the way we'd like, or at least highlighted and emphasized the way we'd like, is that it would certainly be able to fund programs that would expand incentives for EV, electric vehicle deployment. We all know that electrification of the transportation sector is going to drive the most emission reductions in transportation. The other thing, it could fund programs, and this is discussed and talked about in the plan and was highlighted in a recent meeting, that you could have programs that incent or the people who have low efficiency of motor vehicles, that cars that don't get good miles per gallon or trucks that don't get high efficiency ratings, that there'd be incentives for them to trade in what we might call an energy guzzler or a gas guzzler for a much more efficient vehicle. That's a good transition program to full zero emission vehicles, but that would be certainly something. Public transportation, we think it's important to expand public transportation in Maine. And this would certainly benefit a number of people who have trouble getting to work or to school or just between communities. And that's something other states do a great deal of, and certainly could help with rural transportation challenges as well as the others. And the other thing I would mention that isn't, and public transportation isn't yet played up sufficiently in the plan. So we hope that we see a lot more regarding public transportation. And I'd also emphasize what we call active transport, doing more to support biking and walking. So, because what that would do, obviously, the more people can commute by walking or biking to work or to school or to do nearby errands, that would certainly help to reduce what's called vehicle miles traveled and reduce emissions. So those are the kinds of things. Nick, one thing I would add about the measuring and accountability aspects, and this is something they're starting to talk about, is that as we talk about these action goals and these impact goals, that you can actually understand what that means by, for instance, it's measuring actions, whether it's yearly or by 2025 or 2030, you can say, well, what level of incentives for EVs, electric vehicles, do you need? What amount of money will you need to fund that? And what number of vehicles or vehicle sales would you get by that particular milestone year, 2025 or 2030, for instance? And on the impact side, you can also understand and write in, or at least calculate, the job benefits related to those incentives, the health benefits related to reducing air pollution that's tied to motor vehicle emissions, and those kinds of things. Yep. So those are the kinds of things, that metrics we can talk more about later. But obviously measuring is a great wheel. If you measure what you're doing, it's more apt to get done. So that's why we think accountability and measurement is so important.
Agreed. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen and ask, before I get to her, I see some questions coming in the Q&A. Thank you so much. Keep them coming. Just a reminder, we're going to save all the questions for the end. So Kathleen, what do you think has been added or is still missing from the buildings end?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. And thanks, David, for that introductory sort of overview of where we are in the process. For everybody who's joining us today, thank you so much. This is really some of the most critical work that we're doing in the state, and we are really, it feels good to be working on something so positive at this moment, and to have so many people engaged and paying attention. Pretty clear from David's overview there that there are a lot of interconnected parts here. So one of the things that we don't yet see is the relative prioritization and the relative targets. So we know we need more EVs. How many more EVs? How many more EVs by when? That's a level of detail that isn't in the draft yet, because it's the piece that we're still sort of seeing what happens if you turn this dial a little bit and turn that one a little bit more. We expect to see some more modeling coming out of the governor's office on Monday, and to see those numbers then be incorporated into the draft that is released later next week. That's the biggest piece that isn't there yet. I do also want to point out to folks that that some things have been moved around. So you mentioned how many people were involved in the working group process that extended for the first half of 2020. And so for those of you who are following along at home and say, wait, some of the recommendations that I saw presented by, say, the buildings working group, they're not in the buildings section. Don't worry, they've moved around a little bit. We knew all along that there were some really important crossover topics. For example, when you talk about energy, there's the energy generation side and there's the energy use side. Both of those, both the buildings and the energy groups, did a lot of thinking about what the grid and the energy system of Maine's future look like. You don't need to duplicate the recommendations in two parts of the plan, right? So they've been consolidated a little bit. There are a couple of new things, particularly in the building section, which are great to see. The building section specifically calls out appliance standards. There are federal appliance standards and energy standards for appliances, but they don't cover everything. And so this is an opportunity for Maine to really step up and make sure that we're protecting consumers by ensuring that only the most efficient appliances are on offer here in Maine. There's also a piece in the plan that's new that calls for the phase down of Hfcs. So that's hydrofluorocarbons. And this is a piece that actually, there was a bill in the legislature last year that nearly made it to the finish line. And then the legislature unfortunately had to adjourn early because of the pandemic. And so we're pulling that into the plan now to make sure that gets added as well.
Awesome. Are you see other actions that you think deserve more prioritization or should be sort of put to the front?
You know, I think that when we see those numbers get added in to the final plan, it's going to be even more clear how important it is to get started on or to continue the really great work that we've done on weatherizing Maine buildings. We've got some of the oldest housing stock in the country, and we have the highest reliance on fossil fuel heat. So that's a huge weakness for Maine, both in terms of our climate picture, but also just for our quality of life. You know, we've got people who are paying way more than they can afford to, or than they really should, to keep their houses approaching comfortable in the winter, and we can do better. So we'll see some numbers around heat pumps, around energy efficiency programs, and making sure that those are accessible and really targeted to folks across the income distribution. We'll also see, I think, the groundwork for some of the big steps that aren't going to happen this year, right? We're not going to turn a switch and get to net zero building codes in 2021. No one's suggesting that. What work do we need to do in 2021 so that by 2035, all of our new buildings are net zero?
Yep. Great, thank you. Anya, I want to turn to you now and talk about what additions are you excited about or things you're still looking out for?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think the gist of what I want to say is that we're getting there. I think every new rendition that I see, it makes me feel a little bit more hopeful and excited for our climate plan. And something that Kathleen and David both touched on is, or that David's going to talk about in later on, is that there's more modeling to be done, but at the moment, the climate action plan draft still doesn't meet our statutory targets. So that's something that I'm still super concerned about as a Climate Council member. Some things that I am excited about, though, that are newly added to the plan are some more language around equity. There's now going to be an equity subcommittee to keep the climate action plan accountable to our equity principles. And so that feels like a really positive thing to me, and something that came out of the equity analysis. I think there's still some room there to add some more pieces around equity and justice and inclusion. And I think it's just such a vital part of our climate action in the state of Maine to make sure that we're creating solutions and moving towards a state where everyone has access to a just and livable future. And there are a couple things in the equity analysis, such as stronger communications with tribal members and stronger communications with rural communities that I'd like to see in the plan. Something else that I'm really excited about is that there are now education strategies that are in the draft plan. These strategies came from interested students and young people around the state, as well as some people at Department of Education. And they're really just talking about how can we bring our teachers and students up to speed when it comes to climate change education, which up until now has been somewhat lacking in terms of preparing our students and our future generations for climate change and climate change impacts. So those are two things that that have really been sticking out to me in the next draft.
Good. It's good to hear your optimism and excitement about those additions and to everyone. But I want to turn it back to everyone and see if there are things we haven't covered yet in terms of additions, especially know there's some things added about the or in the world of the energy sector. Kathleen, do you want to start there?
Yeah, so we saw in the 2019 legislative session some really amazing goals set, and you covered these a little bit in terms of our transition to renewable energy. We now have some hard work to do to make sure we meet those, right? We have a huge ramp up in clean energy deployment, both solar, which we're going to have to do some real wrestling with the siting of those projects to make sure that we're being thoughtful about our agricultural and working lands. One piece that is new to the climate action plan, though certainly not to the folks thinking about this, is the addition of some offshore wind language in the plan. The plan now calls for the development of a roadmap that really focuses on the infrastructure that Maine will need to build out an offshore wind industry. So supply chain and workforce. And as Anya said, this is a great opportunity for us to address equity and think not just about what are the jobs that need to be done to support an offshore wind industry, but what should those jobs be like? What does a good clean energy job look like? And how are we working with organized labor and all of our contacts across the state to think about what that looks like. The roadmap will complement the state's offshore wind initiative, which is really looking at the siting and development. Again, we've got a whole nother stakeholder group there with our fishermen and those who make their livings on the water. And those things can absolutely coexist. We need to be thoughtful about it. And it's really great to see the climate action plan calling for that kind of a process.
Great. David, how about you from the energy sector? Any additions that are exciting to you?
Just to piggyback a bit on what Kathleen just said is, one thing to keep in mind, we're sending over $5 billion out of state for energy, mostly fossil fuel sourced energy. And bringing that back into Maine by putting a lot more investment dollars into clean renewable energy as well as storage. So as Kathleen said, offshore wind, we hope to have 5,000 megawatts conceivably in offshore wind by 2050, but we'll probably have even more solar generation by 2050, maybe upwards of 7,500 megawatts of solar. And then of course, onshore wind, where we're already leading New England in onshore wind. All of that's going to generate a lot of jobs. And what it's going to do also, it's going to double, if not triple, the electricity grid in the state. So Maine's going to have a much more robust energy grid, electric grid. And you can imagine the size that we're likely to have, because we want to electrify the transportation sector as well as what we're doing in buildings already. So all of this is going to drive a lot of jobs. And the grid modernization process is another one of those processes that will involve stakeholders, because it is about building out a distribution system throughout the state, making it much larger, not only connecting to offshore facilities, but we're going to have literally hundreds, if not thousands, well, thousands of generators of electricity, whether they're panels on homes, solar panels in fields, wind turbines, those kinds of things. They'll be all interconnected. Quite frankly, we'll develop it in a way that it's more reliable, it's more secure, because you can island off conceivably if you've got the right kind of, grid design, which we will, be much more democratized and ultimately much more affordable going forward the way we structure it. But again, the one thing to stress is it's going to take money, but it's money we're already investing. So it's not likely to cost any more than ratepayers are paying now. And it's going to generate a lot of jobs, and obviously it's going to reduce a lot of emissions. And there are tremendous health benefits related to that.
And David, I want to continue with you briefly. I do see that's 12:36, so we're going to I'm going to try to pick up our pace a little bit. But I want to touch on something very important that Anya mentioned, which is that the plan as drafted doesn't meet the targets, right? So, it goes a long way, where Maine is about 17.5 million metric tons of carbon per year. This plan gets us down to about 7, which is a huge and an incredible drop. We're supposed to get to 4. What do you think about that discrepancy, David?
Well, again, as Kathleen said, we'll see if there's new modeling on Monday. So that number may change. And again, that's that. Okay. So we'll wait and see if that changes. We hope to see that change. And of course, what we really need to do is, that's why if we can focus a lot more attention on the priority actions that are likely to drive the most benefits, like expanded renewable energy deployment, expanded EV, electric vehicle deployment in the state, and electrification of the transportation sector, the energy efficiency initiatives that Kathleen has talked about. I think, we'll get closer to the number. And obviously, I think what you'll find, quite frankly, we're likely to change the numbers going forward. Our 45% reduction in greenhouse gases may be determined to be insufficient by 2030. So you might see that change. You might see the 80% by 2050. But getting back to your question, the initial assessment, we're 3 million metric tons short of that 4 million metric tons. So we do want to see more detail, particularly as it relates to those actions that are going to drive the most benefits. We understand there are costs involved, but we know we can address those, and the state is very interested, obviously, in addressing those going forward. And I know we'll talk about funding in a bit.
Yeah. I want to bring it back to Anya now. The other piece that is really hanging over this plan, which is sort of a big surprise, frankly, in 2020, this nightmare year, is the economy, right? Our current economic downturn situation hangs over a lot of the plan and some of the actions involved. But I think we agree that this is an opportunity, if anything else. These actions are economic drivers, places that can bring Maine to a place of innovation, as much as they are environmental or public health solutions. And so, Anya, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about which of these priorities or which of these actions you think will give us the biggest boost.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Nick. And I think while we can't emphasize enough how critical it is that we meet these targets and act quickly on climate change, it's also a real opportunity for economic development and job creation too. And I think there is such an opportunity with this plan and with a lot of the strategies in the plan for a lot of job creation. And I think Kathleen and David have both talked about those things, whether it be the mass expansion of our grid and rollout of EVs, or if it's doing deep retrofits to existing building structures. There are so many jobs and so many people needed to make this possible. And there's so much opportunity that I see within this plan to really transform our economy in Maine, and to not only create jobs, but create, like Kathleen was talking about, good jobs, good paying jobs with benefits that can transform our economy in the state of Maine.
Amen. Amen. A lot of this is, produces some good, envisioning, some optimistic, thinking about where Maine can be in a number of years, which is, bustling and clean and green. So I know we're all excited about that piece of it. Now I want to stop sort of talking about where the plan is right now and start talking about where we're going from here. Kathleen, I'm wondering if I could go to you for two things. One's sort of an update of what's going to happen now, between now and December 1st. And then maybe once the plan is finalized, how does it get implemented? What are the sort of steps or opportunities to put these things off the page and into practice?
Yeah. Well, I just want to acknowledge that there has not been a dull moment in the Climate Council's history, right? Since that group was convened and hit the ground running, it has just been nonstop, and that really does warrant some celebration, because there have been a few distractions this year that none of us were planning on, and we have just gotten a tremendous amount of work under our belts and into this plan. So the last month won't be boring. It will include, next week we mentioned that we'll see that updated modeling from Synapse that will really help us drill down to some of those details that we have noted are missing. We'll see those incorporated into a final draft, which we expect to see sort of late next week, beginning of the following week. There may be some minor language changes from the draft that is in front of us right now, but the biggest will be the addition of those specific targets. The council will meet on November 12th and have an opportunity to discuss that and hopefully approve the plan. So the goal really is for the plan to be finalized by the middle of November, so that there's a couple of weeks to pull it together into a beautiful and presentable package. And we expect to see an official rollout on December 1st. That coincidentally is the day where we start to plan for the next legislative session. There are a million questions about what that session looks like, from the logistics of, where and when is the legislature meeting, with COVID precautions in mind. But what we're really thinking about is, how does that climate action plan show up in the legislative priorities for 2021? There are certainly things that will come directly out of the plan, but not everything in the plan will require legislation to start moving. There are some things that are specifically in the purview of our state agencies. So for example, how does the Department of Transportation start to prepare for the transportation system of the future, or continue preparing? How does Efficiency Maine start to gear up its programs to really go all in on our heat pump goals? We'll see some of that happening. There may be things that Governor Mills addresses through executive order. And of course, the huge question mark hanging over all of this is the outcome of the presidential election, because quite honestly, there's a scenario where climate change and climate action is not just in the hands of the states, but is really embraced by our federal government. And in that scenario, there could be some national targets and some federal funding that helps us really accelerate the work that we're doing. A lot is going to happen. I can't tell you exactly what, but it'll be some combination of legislation, agency action, executive action, and knock on wood, some federal action.
Great, thanks. I'm looking forward to it. But, we know it's not going to be easy, right? We are all extremely excited about this and are welcoming it with open arms, but that doesn't mean there won't be some roadblocks potentially in the way, in various ways of getting these things implemented. So I want to sort of turn now to some of those roadblocks. David, you talked a little bit about funding before. Can you talk about some of the funding challenges that are in front of us?
Yeah, certainly, Nate. Before I do that, let me just mention a couple of things I think we want to highlight because we don't want to miss as it relates to natural and working lands. As we look at priorities, and we're anxious to see this in the plan. Of course, there's reference to more sustainable agriculture, more sustainable forestry. These are going to be big jobs drivers. There are already big jobs drivers in Maine, and so we want to make sure that that plays out appropriately. We want to see, and as it relates to funding, we'd love to see some sustained, dedicated funding for working land conservation and preservation. And part of that too is if we develop a sequestration program that rewards not only sequestration of carbon in healthy soils and forests and agricultural, like cover crops, for instance, but also with embodied carbon. I mean, to the extent that we start building buildings, commercial buildings, homes already are mostly wood, but to the extent that commercial buildings become wood-based by mass timber, which is laminated, CLT products, then that's something that Maine can manufacture a great deal and export throughout the country, if not internationally. So getting back to funding, the big challenge, one of the big missing things in the plan is it avoids talking about funding. As I said earlier, I think it's awfully important to understand whether or not a plan is actionable or measurable, to understand how much we're going to need to invest to get things done, to actually get an action implemented. So I think we need to do that. And at the same time, make sure we articulate to the public, these are challenges we may not be able to meet, but we want to be upfront and talk about what it's likely to require. And the plan, at least now, even though it hasn't detailed, particularly as it relates to those key, priority actions that we'd love to see elevated, they haven't detailed funding or funding for much of anything else. At least, they've started to articulate within the plan, they've talked about the funding sources. So the good news is, I think everybody agrees that bonding, given interest rates are so low, that's going to be part of the package, bonding packages to fund much of this. And including adaptation. I should have mentioned earlier, there's a lot in the plan about community resilience and adaptation. And there are a lot of jobs there conceivably as well. So there's talk about adaptation funding. There's talk about conceivably a green bank, which you could conceivably fund both renewable energy, energy efficiency, and even climate resilience kinds of initiatives. There's talk about, having polluters pay. There's talk about, and this is important, this gets to one of Kathleen's points about federal funding. There are a number of federal bills now that, if successful, will generate a lot of money for climate action. And that relates to carbon pricing. Economists have argued for years the most efficient way to get all of this done, to address the causes and consequences of climate change, is to have carbon, to put a price on carbon pollution. So that's in there as well. And let me just stop there. But there's a lot listed on funding. We just need to see more detail as much of the other stuff.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, and I'd like to, so we have a ton of questions, which is awesome. And I see that time's going. So we have a couple more things we want to get to, but we'll go quickly and we'll get to those questions. And, I want to turn it to Anya, some more roadblocks, maybe in sort of the capacity realm, right?
Yeah. And I'll try and keep this quick, but basically there's some roadblocks with the capacity of state agencies and other groups to get this work done, whether it be staffing or funding, like David was talking about. And also something that's come up, many times during this hour is that there's a lot going on in the world right now. There are a lot of competing crises that need urgent attention. And so I think it's so vital that we come up with a strong climate action plan, but certainly there's been more hesitation since, as Kathleen said, that, ever since the Climate Council started, there's been just a slew of, global pandemics and crises that are happening that that demand attention as well. So so basically, yeah, there's some roadblocks to ensuring that we have the most urgent plan possible.
Thank you. And Kathleen, there's the old political roadblocks. Is that right?
There are, but here's the thing, Nick. As much as we can answer the questions about funding challenges, and we can connect the dots around capacity challenges, we can go a long way towards meeting some of those concerns about the politics of it all. Maine people are really clear that climate change is happening. It's impacting their daily lives, you know, from sea level rise to ticks and Lyme disease. There's no real debate about whether these are necessary challenges that we meet. And so the question is all about how. And a lot of that falls to those of us who are doing the work, right? To really make the pitch directly to Maine people to show how these improvements, how this climate action actually addresses all of these other challenges that we face as well. As Anya said, you know, we can do this in a way that makes Maine a stronger and more inclusive and more resilient place for all of us. And that, you know, again, knock wood, it goes a long way towards overcoming the resistance, because change is hard, right? Change is hard, and we're looking at making some pretty big changes in the way that our state functions. But geez, I don't know that once we really communicate the wonder of heat pumps as opposed to expensive and smelly and ineffective oil heat, I don't think we get a lot of pushback once we take that weekly or maybe more than that trip to the gas station to fill up that really inefficient vehicle. We replace that with an EV. All of a sudden, life seems a little bit smoother. So we can get there.
Amen. I love it. I want to end, before we get to our questions, with just a general question for each of you. Maybe we can just do this with one or two sentences, which is, how are we feeling about this plan? Is this something that we feel like we can live with? Does it inspire you? I'd like to hear briefly from each of you. Maybe David will go first.
I was hoping the ladies first. No.
Anyone can go.
I'm anxious. I mean, I'm optimistic. I mean, obviously, I think Maine's done a tremendous amount over the last couple of years, and so I'm very optimistic. Although it's the devil's in the detail, and the plan is just, even though it's going to be announced on December 1, it's a working document. We want to see it adjusted, improved going forward, and I'm sure we will. So I'm optimistic, although I'm waiting to. I'll leave it at that. I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I think I feel the same. Having a background in climate justice activism, I don't think this plan is ever going to be, exactly what I want it to be. But I have hope that it'll get us on the right track to our targets. So I have hope.
Great.
Yeah, and Anya, I think at one point you said each iteration of the plan has been more encouraging than the previous, and that gives me hope too, right? That this is a process, and it's a process that hundreds of people are deeply involved in. We have great expertise and great ideas and great passion in the state, and this process has really engaged a lot of people. We're going to need everybody to stay engaged, from the Climate Council through the working groups to those of you who are on this call today. December 1st is a really important milestone for the Climate Council, but our work is by no means approaching its end. We're getting going, everybody. This is the beginning. So we'll keep going.
Well, thank you all so much for your information, and we're going to turn it over to questions now. I have one little thing to do first, which is a quick action item. The Climate Council is meeting on November 12th to look at, potentially finalize this plan, draft plan, and anyone can join. So I'm putting in the chat now the registration link for that meeting on the 12th. We encourage everyone here to sign up. This is super important stuff. This is when it happens, and you want to be there. So sign up. And now I want to turn over to questions. So we have a ton of questions. So hang on with me as we go through. I think my colleagues here can stay on a little bit after the hour if we get to that. Great, thanks. And let me try to wade through. We have a couple questions in here about consumer-owned utilities in one way or another. You know, can David, maybe could you talk about the options of a consumer-owned utility, what that might help with, or the feasibility of that?
Well, conceptually, it's a great idea because it really is about, you know, making sure that the utilities are working in the public interest. The challenge is obviously a transition. Maine has two, you know, investor-owned utilities in the state. So the challenge, there's significant political challenges, but the concept itself would likely be one that would lead to, would it, you know, accelerate our transition to cleaner energy, would accelerate our effort to build out and transform the grid that we talked about earlier. It would certainly be more democratic in terms of decisions being made. And again, instead of the money going to the profits of the utility company, all the money would be invested in Maine ratepayers and Maine infrastructure. Having said all that, because I think it's a wonderful idea, it's certainly going to be explored. It's at least mentioned for exploration in the plan, but I don't want to understate the political challenges. And why don't I just leave it at that? I don't know if Kathleen or Anya wants to add more to that.
Yeah, I think that, you know, we know that Maine's electric system, both the grid itself and the energy that it distributes, needs to be updated. And so certainly the ownership of utilities is a piece that could change, but there are a whole bunch of other pieces that could and need to change as well. So we're already seeing some work around grid modernization, envisioning, you know, what do Mainers need from their utility and how do we build that, and let's design that and the regulatory system to support it and to encourage it, and then we can figure out who needs to own it as well. It's certainly a complex issue and one that we're just at the beginning of exploring. Thank you.
A good question here from Pat about job training. So is there any consideration in the plan about, you know, we're all excited about the job opportunities coming out of some of these initiatives. Is there any information or consideration about, you know, job training opportunities to facilitate these workers coming up, perhaps using community colleges or other areas? Folks have any?
Yeah, I can take a first swing at that, and then Kathleen and David, feel free to add on. But I think two things that I see. One is that education piece, so finding ways to train teachers to then, you know, talk about climate change with their students. And then also there's a new section that was put in the last draft, section H, that includes the development of a Maine Climate Corps, which would be a job training program for young people entering into the field of sustainability or buildings or infrastructure or electric. And so that's a nice part of the plan that's going to hint towards some of that job creation and training.
Yeah, I would just add workforce, you know, training is mentioned. I think you'll see a lot more of it. I know the Economic Recovery Committee is doing work. They'll come out with some report as well on December 1st. I think there's a lot of overlap between what they're doing and what the Climate Council's doing, but certainly upskilling workforce training is going to be important as we build out the grid, as we you know, build out all this new generation, clean energy generation and storage, as we do a lot of the adaptation work. All of that is a lot of building trade and just trade work. And so I think you'll see more of it in the plan as it's finalized.
Great. A good question here from JD. What is the role of the public in implementing this plan? How can the public help? What is it out of our hands, or What role do we have?
It is never out of our hands, Nick. We need the public involved in this. I love that you put the link into the November 12th meeting. There's value both for you all to participate and hear the discussion there, because it's very interesting, but also value for the council itself to see how many folks are tuning in. That matters a lot. And the other piece is, as we start to see what's going to be pursued through legislation, what's going to be pursued through agency action, we will be in contact with all of you, right? We will let you know what are the legislative priorities. We always love to get folks involved in reaching out to your representatives, to your state senators, letting them know that you care and that you want to see this legislation advance. We will definitely let you know as there are opportunities, but in the meantime, sign up for that November 12th meeting and let your friends know that this is pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think Kathleen, on that note, it's so important to educate yourself. So come to webinars like these, and also to continue to have conversations with your friends and colleagues about the importance of climate action in Maine. I think it's so important that we build a strong base and a strong, excuse me, movement of climate action supporters in the state of Maine. And so, yeah, there are so many things that you can do as an individual to support the climate action plan.
Awesome, thanks. See a couple of questions about how this climate plan has sort of folded into the elections right now. Both, has it become a part of some of the local races being run, and looking forward, how might the results of the Senate or the presidential election impact what happens going forward? Big question, but.
Well, I guess I could start with the big one, the presidential race. It's no state, including Maine, will meet what it needs to do in terms of its climate action goals, quite frankly, and what science requires, without the federal government being a very big partner, if not, and certainly the biggest partner. So it's critical that whoever wins in next week, that we really focus on climate action, and so that's extremely critical. And I guess I won't get into the politics. I think where most people know where the presidential candidates stand, but it really is an economic recovery opportunity as well to really help to transition our nation and to invest in these programs, which will be all domestic jobs, for instance. I mean, much of this clean economy work is domestic work. People can work locally. It'll be good paying jobs if we upskill the workers, which they need to be upskilled in many instances to build out this infrastructure. So I think it's critical that this election, as all elections, is very critical.
Thank you. So quick time check. It's 1:02. I know people have lots of other things happening. We have a go ahead for at least grab onto our folks for another few minutes, and we have a bunch of questions left. So I think we're going to go to 1:10, no later than 1:10. I'm shutting it down. If you have additional questions that we don't get to, here is my email. Don't sign me up for any newsletters or anything. That's my email. I'm happy to either pass on questions to our panelists or try to answer them directly if we don't get to them. So I see a bunch of questions asking about tidal energy. Can someone quickly address sort of the potential of tidal energy to play a role in Maine?
Well, I guess I can comment. There is a tidal project. The Bay of Fundy and the coast of Maine you have the highest tides in the world. And there are projects that are underway, as well as other projects internationally. And what it does is, as the tide goes in and out, you have generators in the water, electric generators that basically use that energy and transform that energy into electricity. So it's certainly under development. It'll continue to be under development. It's not at a stage where deployment is as easily or readily as solar and wind. So I'm not sure to what extent, but certainly Maine can benefit. there are so many other technologies being developed now that are being explored, but certainly tidal is one that'll continue to be explored. It is being explored in Maine.
Awesome. Question about LNG, liquefied natural gas. Do we see that also playing a role moving forward, or is that considered in the plan in any way?
Well, gas is, but Maine is, as I think everybody knows, Maine is not a gas producer. We don't have any LNG, liquefied natural gas ports, so we're not going to be an exporter. Natural gas is part of our energy mix in New England and part of our energy mix here in Maine. It'll continue to be, but gas is not the bridge to a clean energy future that we thought it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Methane is a higher, radiative factor, heating, global warming factor than carbon. And there are a lot of emissions as it relates to natural gas. So I think what we're finding is we're moving away from natural gas. It's going to take a number of years, although we've moved away from coal much faster than we anticipated. But I don't see a big role for certainly LNG, and any role for LNG in Maine.
Great. And another question too about public transportation. Bobby here mentioned potential for a light rail link between Portland and Lewiston. Are there other solutions like that that are possible or feasible?
I think there are a lot of innovative solutions that we can and should and are should be and are exploring. I think sometimes it's easy for us to say, well, public transportation really suits urban communities, and that's certainly true. We've got the picture of the city bus in our minds, and we are increasingly seeing those city buses become electric city buses. But that doesn't mean that there aren't appropriate solutions for rural communities. Our neighbor, Vermont, has one of the highest investments per capita in public transit in the country. That tells us something, right? That there's a way to meet the needs of rural communities through ride sharing, through carpooling, through buses. There are all sorts of opportunities. And I think that we're really going to need to think more broadly about what public transit looks like as we move forward.
Great. So with the 3 minutes left, I just want to see if the panelists themselves have other things that haven't been said yet, or maybe any last words before we head out. Or not.
I'll go for it. I think that something that I've been thinking about a lot recently with the Climate Action Plan is just the role that the state of Maine has to play in the nation and in the world. And I think, we've talked about a lot of opportunities within the state today, but also there's so many opportunities on a national and global level for the state of Maine to be a leader. And that's something that really excites me about the Climate Action Plan and about this work, is that Maine is a leader in many other ways, and it's a very innovative state with a lot of just very excited, passionate people, and so I have hope that we can serve as a leader and as a template for other states that are working on plans like this as well.
Yeah.
Nick, one thing I'd add quick is that I think it's important for the Climate Council. There's so many dedicated people on that council to continue to be very active, as Kathleen said, for the working group members to be involved. I would hope that the plan will incorporate language that probably makes the council, quite frankly, more independent, involves less state agency, state people, so that it becomes a more independent council that can be, quite frankly, probably more objective. As you know, it's hard to grade yourself, and it's easier for outside experts and parties to grade and drive progress going forward. So I'd hope they'd consider, plus it protects it politically from any administration change. Governor Mills is a great governor. She's doing a great job as it relates to climate action. The prior governor did not. And so I've seen that in Maryland, where we had a transition to a governor that didn't support more ambitious climate action. So making that council, keeping that council active, making it more independent, giving it some resources and more authority to make adjustments to the plan and to hold state agencies and state action accountable, I think would be an added benefit.
Great. Well, I see it's 1:09, so I'm going to say goodbye and thank you. I want to thank so much David Costello from NRCM, Kathleen Meal from MCV, on your right from Sierra Club and Maine Youth for Climate Justice. I want to thank Todd Martin from NRCM for running the show. I want to thank all of you for joining. This was a great turnout. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I expect my inbox to be full when we get back, so thank you. Please, like we said, this is work that is just, this is continuing. The plan on the December 1st is not the end of anything. And so we need all your attention and your eyes and your input and your voices as we move forward to make the state we want it to be. So thank you all very much. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks,
Thank
Nick.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.